Now, for me, I was using anger in a really negative way. I thought it was an empowering way, that I had this short fuse and I would get super angry and I'd tell people to change. Anger actually can be one of the most powerful, positive forces in our lives, still a negative mood. But Martin Luther King changed the world with some anger directed in a positive way. Gandhi changed the world with some anger directed in a positive way. When we see things that aren't right and we get angry enough that we're going to put our life on the line to make a change, we can change the frickin' world with anger. Now, we don't want to live there and we don't want to act out of anger, but anger can give us the energy needed to start to make change in a really, really powerful way if we use it in the right way.
And we are back on the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring podcast. Today, we have Matt O'Neill with us. He is the host of the Good Mood Revolution podcast. Matt, we've shared so much stuff in common around the idea of podcasting, around the idea of mindset and the importance of mindset. Brother, man, it's good to have you on the show.
Dude, I am so freaking jacked to be here today. And I think this is the only thing that matters, mindset.
It's when I started my podcast, I called it the Triple M podcast, or actually first it was called the OP3M podcast. And that was supposed to be a play on OPM, which is other people's money, which is a real estate term. And me and about 4 other people understood what that meant. So I switched to the 3M podcast and then quickly realized I think I got a brand infringement on that one. And then I went to, because I always loved the idea of mindset being so important, starting off with money, because a lot of the stuff we talk about is business and economics and revenue and wealth. But mindset is the centerpiece of everything. And the more I talk with people on the different podcasts, more I talk with people who are, leaders of billion-dollar companies, mindset is the centerpiece. And a lot of people, when they hear the word mindset, they kind of groan a little bit and go, "Oh, we're going to have one of those whooshy woo-woo conversations." And I think a lot of times people dismiss around the most important element. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the thing that's even more important than the mindset is your emotional state. And between the two, emotional state and mindset, you can rule the world. So there is a electromagnetic field around your brain, but the electromagnetic field around your heart is 5,000 times stronger. So all these billionaires that you're talking to, and anyone that's super successful in life, understands the power of manifesting. I haven't met a single super uber successful person that does not understand the power of manifesting, because it's the way that we manifest success. But we don't actually manifest it with our thoughts. More so, it's the feeling that is attracting the majority of everything that we have in our life.
Yeah. And it's hard to think about that, especially as, somebody like myself, who's very much an analytical brain. And I build out things like systems and models and strategies and, Excel tables and all these other things. And then, feelings are for somebody else. It's just, you kind of, I'll get it. I'll get to that part. I'll download my feelings off of Amazon and install them later.
Let me give you the feeling that you're feeling as you're building out these systems. It's a feeling of confidence that this is mine. So as you're being super analytical and as you're building out your systems and your strategies, you have a feeling that this is going to work. And that feeling is actually attracting it, working. And it's not necessarily only the strategy, because there's a lot of really smart people out there that don't have what they want. It's the ones who are super confident that it's coming, who also are smart, that end up making everything work.
I had a friend of mine who teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His name's Cicero. And one of the things that he really talks about when he teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very different than the way I've taught it. And it's something that it's ruminated in my brain for a long period of time, about the idea that when he teaches about the feeling of doing it. And he teaches about, whereas I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's always been about the taxonomy of it. I know this position, I know this position, I know this move, I know the connective tissues, I can build objects, relations, systems, and models. Whereas when he teaches it, it's very almost artistic in nature. And when we talk about the balance of feelings and the balance of strategy, is the connective tissues between that, is it the art versus the science? Is that what we're talking about?
I think they're both so important. So we got mindset and we've got emotion. And, I think I played basketball and I played this morning. There's sometimes when I just feel that these shots are going to go in. And I've practiced that shot and the technique and studied the jump shot so many times. But when I'm in a game, I know the shot's going to go in. Or if I have a feeling that the shots aren't going to go in, they're not going in. And it's like super high performance ends up becoming a feeling. But we talk about money. This is a money mindset mentoring podcast. Money's useless. The only thing we really want money for is for things that are going to make us feel a certain way. And but what I talk about is how to feel really freaking amazing. Typically people think I'll get a lot of money and then that'll give me all these options and all this freedom and then I'll feel amazing. It's always going to come back to I'm doing all this stuff. I'm grinding all this way because eventually I want to feel a certain way. I would say shortcut it. Let's feel the freaking way we want to feel today and then get lots of money too.
No, in that belief, what you're really talking, I think, about is when you mention the word conscious happiness. And in your book, you talk about authentic happiness is not the norm for most people. What we need is a good mood revolution. And that goes to your podcast as well. And what was the defining moment in your life where you ignited that sort of revolutionary mindset within you?
I was having a really bad time. Basically, for the majority of the time, I was having a really bad time. I didn't feel very good about the way my parents had been when I was growing up. My dad abandoned us when I was 5. We didn't have any money. My mom was a secretary. There's 4 of us. There wasn't enough money for groceries. And, I just felt like things weren't fair. And my dad was not the coolest guy to me when I would see him. And I thought that wasn't fair. I wanted the relationship where the dad would throw the ball. I wanted a guy that actually cared about me and wanted to see me succeed and do well in life. And I just kind of always felt like I had the short stick because I didn't get that. And then when I was 25, I saw the movie The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. And I had, up to that point, been blaming every one of my problems on my upbringing, my dad, other people, these mean jerks out there, my boss. And in that movie, she said, actually, every single thing in your life is being attracted to you by your thoughts. And I was like, what? So if I want the life I want, all I have to do is change my thoughts and I'll have it. And I was like, what the heck? I don't have the life I want right now. Why don't I try it? And then I tried it and holy shit, it worked.
And I always try to find in Canada, we have this thing called TSN, which is the sports network. And they always talk about the TSN turning point, which is that moment which something shifts from, whatever the one state is to the other. And you shared that you grew up in a household where, bad moods were prevalent and sort of deeply influenced you. In your words, you said arguments, upset feelings, and raised voices were common in your household. How did those experiences shape the framework of now what you call the good mood revolution?
Yeah, man. Well, first, we model our parents. So all of my relationships were tumultuous. And I would raise my voice and I would get out of line just like I was raised. And I just kind of thought, this is what I felt about myself. I was like, yeah, man, I've got a short fuse. It's how I was born. I got a short fuse. It's just who I am. If I was different, some people are cool as a cucumber. I'm not. I got a short fuse. I'm going to blow up. And then what I found out was that, no, that was actually just a conditioned behavior. And that, in fact, if I dove into what is this thing that's creating the short fuse, analyzed it, I could totally reprogram who I am. And I could be one of the most peaceful people you've ever met, which is who I've become. That's
amazing. It's funny. I was talking to a guy at a trade show, it was Collision in Toronto, and he was an IT guy, and he was supposed to be there to develop leads. Think about your programmer at a trade show booth trying to pick up clients, and get sales happening, and he just was all glum about it. And I said to him, what do you not like? He goes, oh, I can't sell. I can't sell. And I'm like, dude, yeah, you can. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, dude, you just sold me. You just sold me on the fact that you can't sell. All you need to do is just find another product, one that's more useful. and then you'll be able to sell it, because you can sell anything that you believe in.
Right.
And the idea that you, at that moment, you were saying that, hey, I'm a person who's got a hot-headed, I've got a short fuse.
Right.
You were selling yourself on something that you believed in. And all you did is really internally is change the narrative, change the product, and put another thing on the shelf. And that's the thing that you're selling yourself out to the market.
Yeah. And there's absolutely whatever we believe, we'll find evidence for. So, and then because we're finding evidence, we believe it even more. That's the cycle, is that I believed I had a short fuse, and I found evidence about me blowing up at people. And then that increases the belief, and then I find more evidence, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. So deciding that I was going to be different, another belief that I had was I'm unlucky. That was a belief. Our family's unlucky. And guess what? We didn't have a whole lot of luck, and I found lots of evidence we were unlucky. But what happens is your subconscious starts to sabotage your luck. It starts to do stupid things, and then you blame it on being unlucky, but really you were sabotaging all your own luck. And that's what was happening with everything. It was as soon as I started to get conscious about how do I want to be, who do I want to be, and then let's program myself to be that person. I literally rewired my entire psyche and became a person that I respected instead of somebody that I just thought I was by default.
And that's a hard thing to do, especially if we think about the person today, because the person today who's trying to go through that reprogramming, they're not only trying to reprogram their internal self, they're trying to reprogram their external self, especially in this world that we have of the echo chamber, which is social media. Because if you have this negative Nelly sort of mindset that, I'm unlucky, I look for bad things happening, the news, everything around them, they're going to start to really build a pattern that happens on this little device here that just kind of keeps on telling him, yep, you are definitely unlucky. Yep, you're never going to make any money. Yep, you should fight the system, and, all that other stuff. And so they not have to reprogram themselves in the way that they deal with themselves. It's how they deal with the world around them. What are some strategies people can use to change the way that they express themselves with the world around them once they've done that internal work?
Well, we have to do the internal work first, and the phone is going to get in the way of that. You're saying we need to, first of all, analyze our inputs. So if we put garbage in, which is a bunch of fear and manipulation, then we're going to have garbage out. I'd say, I learned this, 15 years ago, to analyze everything that I was putting into my brain. Any news media is negative media. Any social media is negative media. Look at the TV shows that most people watch, super high drama, murder, hiding the body. You could get caught at any moment. The most popular podcasts are not the inspiring money mindset mentoring podcasts, even though your podcast is popular. The most popular are true crime. How did everybody 100%. Kill each other? And so that if we feed our brain with all of this negativity, all this anxiety, guess what comes out of our mouth? Negativity and anxiety. And then the people that are around us, because like people hang out with like people, are also negative and anxious. So it starts by being super intentional about inputs. And I would analyze every single input. What am I watching? What am I listening to? What am I reading? Is it inspiring and taking me to this vision of who I want to be? And I wanted to be really positive and happy. And I ended up cutting just about every input, including deleting all social media off my phone.
Yeah, I think that's a smart mechanism, because a lot of times the decisions you make on social media are not made by you, but it's made by the device. There's been times where I've been sitting around a campfire with my wife, and we're talking about getting a gift for somebody, for a wedding shower or something like that. And then, the next time you jump on this device, all it does is start throwing your stuff up for wedding showers. And the device is listening. And if you're having negative conversations and you're having, with the people around you, and this little listening thing is going to get there, it's going to start throwing that stuff back into your echo chamber. And it's controlling those inputs, I think, are really important. And throwing that off while you're doing that reprogramming, shutting it off I would say is a fantastic idea.
So here's a simple
practical
those. Way, Steve. And this is how I started. I didn't delete my social media apps off they're not deleted completely. They're on my computer. We have social media strategy where we post, not consume, and reply, not consume. However, I didn't start out by deleting these social media apps. I started out by turning my phone on airplane mode when I went to bed. And very simply, I wrote airplane mode on a piece of paper and taped it next to my phone charger. So that as I put the phone on the phone charger, I retrained in myself. I created a habit to move my phone to airplane mode. What this does, because my phone's my alarm, and just about everybody is going to tell me, well, my phone's my alarm. Of course, I'm going to look at it first thing when I wake up. Me too, but I just turn it to airplane mode. And if you're thinking, oh yeah, well, what if somebody important needs me? By the way, you can have really important people ring through when your phone's on airplane mode. There's a setting on that as well. So I turn it to airplane mode. Then when I wake up and turn my alarm off, instantly my habit is to go to my program. Like, let me check email. That's the very first thing I would do. I'll still just be waking up and go to push the email now. This has been on airplane mode for years. And it'll say, your phone's on airplane mode, dummy. You can't do that. And I have now saved myself from moving into reactionary fight or flight. And I set the phone down. I'm like, oh, I was protecting myself and protecting the sacred time so that I could work on myself and become a better human being this morning. And I'll get to the phone here in a few hours.
That makes so much sense. I think for me, I for my morning routine, I make it so tight that when I get up, I don't have time for that. You know, I get up at 4:45 and I go to the gym for 5:30. And, you know, my bag's ready. I now have my bag at the door, so I can even make it tighter. It's ready the night before. I've got my water bottle and everything that I need to go for jiu-jitsu in the morning. And so I can set my time so tight that I know I get up. In the wintertime, I give myself a little bit more time because I got to scrape off the car. But otherwise, you know, I've got that time to be able to get up. There's no time for social media first thing in the morning. And so I can just get up and get into action and go. And when I get home, my kids are there, you know, I have to pay attention to them because if I don't, you know, chaos is going to ensue. So need to make sure that we pay attention there. And then I have my meetings and I just roll right into it. And I'm very intentional with my morning because the things that are most important, I try to get done first.
Yeah. And so you're talking about some pretty happy habits.
Very happy habits. Yeah, nothing better than choking somebody first thing in the morning.
Exercise is one of the happiest things we possibly can do. So
preach to me, brother, on that one.
In the morning, you're getting up and you're feeding yourself with exercise. And what was cool about your exercise, it's also what I do with basketball, is that you've got friends and relationships there. So it's not just exercise, it's also exercise and now bonding and connection, which is another really happy habit. Isolation and loneliness is the real pandemic right now. And social media is feeding it, where we think that we're connected, but we're not. And we're isolated and we're alone and we're comparing ourselves to everybody's perfect life on the screen and then feeling even worse about ourselves and then isolating even more because we can't have them see how bad my life is. And then we'll go post something the one time we do something cool. And then we're like, but that's not even the real me. I usually just hang out at home. And it's like this ugly, vicious cycle. So you're getting out of the cycle. You're first thing, exercising and connecting with people immediately. Then you come home and you connect with people you love again. And then you go to work and you have meetings and you connect with people again. Like, this is a really joyful life you've got.
You know, I'm not going to boast, but I do love it, man. I talk to so many people. And I agree with you that the loneliness pandemic is probably one of the most dangerous things that we have going on. I've seen so many people who've, you know, since that, especially since the lockdown, they just haven't made that reconnection back into society. They live behind a screen. They don't go out and see people in person, you know, don't share the same, you know, share the same breath space as other individuals. And I think that to me is so critically important to get you into a better mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting you call it breath space. When the pandemic hit, I was very vocal on social media that we should not shut down, that the isolation was going to create more challenges and probably cause more health problems than just going ahead and everyone getting it. Because I said every single person has had the flu in their life. Every single person is going to have COVID. You can't avoid it. And at the moment in time, it was an inappropriate thing to say because people were so scared and they couldn't deal with that reality that everyone was going to get it. And so we shut everything down and people got really upset with me. I deleted all the posts because I got so much hate over how insensitive I was. But what ended up happening? crazy amounts of mental health issues, lots of drug and alcohol abuse, so much isolation. Some, as you're saying, people haven't even bounced back from the damage that decision made. And I have not met a single person who hasn't had COVID.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things I agree with you, and the one thing I disagree with you on. And the things that I agree with you on, I mean, we had the liquor stores were required to stay open, but the gyms were required to shut down.
Oh my
How does
God.
that make any sense? That just was nonsensical. The one thing I don't agree with is that you shouldn't have pulled those posts down. Because to me, there's so many voices that were silenced during that time period due to shame and all this negativity that would happen. And, I just had a conversation with a lady who thought very differently I did about politics. But we were able to have a good conversation and, continue forward in a very positive way, agreeing that while we might not agree on this topic, we can still agree on other ones. And it was such a polarizing thing. And there was a lot of people whose voices were silenced during that process. And that I think was completely wrong.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the personal decision too, when you as for me, I commit to a life of joy and happiness. And the drama and the conflict that I created with such a controversial topic was pulling me out of my joy and happiness. And while I could have stood tall and fought, there's some fights I just don't need to fight. Yep. And that was one of them. And it was a time to be with family and to be with family in a powerful way. And I just didn't need that kind of muddling up my space, which is why I pulled them down and just said, hey, this is my opinion. And at the same time, I don't need the world to come and shout at me. And some people were agreeing and some people weren't. It just wasn't for me at the moment. But let's talk about some other things that make us happy. So you've hit on the first two that are the most important.
What I want to talk about is we talked a little bit about cutting certain things out, and I want to start talking about adding things in.
Right.
And one of the things that you've really identified with is the work by Dr. David Hawkins, the map of consciousness. And you kind of worked it a little bit into the progression of moods. And you wrote that Dr. David Hawkins' ladder of emotions made sense, and that you've modified it to align more with what you know to be true. Talk about the key changes that you've made to his work.
Yeah, so Dr. David Hawkins came up with a framework of consciousness. And at the lowest end of consciousness is shame, this feeling that there's something wrong with me. And that's the most destructive form of thought and emotion that we possibly could feel. And I totally agree. And the second most destructive thought is guilt, this feeling that I should be punished. And while there's a positive form of guilt and remorse, that also staying there and never forgiving ourselves is going to create a lot of darkness. And then as we feel bad, we're going to do bad. Where I started to veer from his map and things didn't make as much sense is when he started to get into positive moods. And for Dr. Hawkins, the first positive mood is courage. And to me, that's not the first positive mood. For me, the foundation of all positive emotion is going to come from humility and integrity. And that once we have this basis where we're no longer comparing ourselves to others, which social media definitely is all comparison. Comparison is pride. And when we're in pride, that's the last of the bad moods. When we're in pride, the way out of it is humility. And we start to say, actually, I don't know if I'm better than this person. I don't know if they're better than me. I'm going to be humble in this moment and just start to say, I don't need to compare myself or figure out who's better or who's not. I just need to stand firm in my own integrity and say, am I happy with the values that I'm choosing to live by? And that's the first positive step to where we can get into higher good moods. And that's really where I started to veer from him. But each of my positive moods kind of veers from where his thought process was.
So let's go through the hierarchy, the ladder. Let's go from the bottom of the ladder all the way to the top and kind of list each of them so we can have a sort of a working chart to kind of mentally work from.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first two, shame and guilt. The next is hopelessness. And, Hawkins here, I think he says apathy. For me, hopelessness makes a lot more sense in today's world. And hopelessness just says that things are bad and they're not going to get better. And then we move into sadness. Now, each level, more energy shows up than the level before, and less damage. So shame is going to have the worst energy and it's going to have the most damage. Hopelessness stops trying to damage other people like shame would, where we don't feel good and then we want to make other people feel bad. But hopelessness is where we could damage ourselves. In sadness, we finally start to have some remorse, and we finally start to say, man, I'm kind of sad about the way I've acted or the way that the world is. And in sadness, we can start to ask for help. In hopelessness is just beyond hope. We can't even ask for help. But once we get to sadness and we start to be kind of sad about what's going on, we might say, I'm feeling down. Can you help me? And that's super positive. Coming from shame, guilt, and hopelessness, we're not going to ask for help. But once we progress to the emotion of sadness, we start to ask for help. But beyond that comes an emotion that gives us a lot more energy, but is also destructive, and that's fear. Fear that everything's going to go wrong. In fear, we can get hyperactive and take a lot of action, but a lot of times it's pretty bad action because we're always thinking everything's going to go wrong, and then that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the first positive step on the progression is the emotion of desire. And once we're done fearing everything and feeling sad about it and thinking that everything's bad, we finally desire a future that could be good. And in desire, we start to like manifest the life that we want. And this is where, for me, I latched onto desire when I was 25 and said, I'm going to manifest this freaking awesome life, and I'm going to have all this money and this great house. I'm going to have the wonderful car, the family. And I did. I manifested all of it with the power of, or the law of attraction and the power of manifestation. And yet, I found myself, like many people do when they manifest everything, unhappy. And that is because desire is still a negative mood.
So so desire isn't past that inflection point into the positive side of things.
No,
because as I was listening to what you were describing, I was like, oh, okay, we're on the positive side. Then you threw that little hook at the end of like, just kidding, we're not there yet. And so is that the last step on the side? So we had the different elements, and as we move that chart and we get into being able to crest into the positive, it's desire, that moment in which that can happen.
Desire is the most positive step on the negative side. And it's a crucial step. And anyone that I coach that feels really bad, my first move is to get them to desire a better life and to move them into desire. In this lifetime, if somebody's been hanging out in the lowest 4 negative moods, and they just move into desire, such a positive step. And so you'll start to see this, and you'll see this on social media a lot. People starting to post like really provocative pictures of themselves. That's a desire emotion. Or people posting about how they just got this Ferrari or money or success. You know, oftentimes you'll hear rappers talk about all their money and things like that. They're in this emotion of desire. And that's a positive step. And they're kind of bragging about, hey, I'm in desire now. Like, this is so cool. I'm so much better off than I used to be. And it's true. And yet it's still a negative place. And here's the reason. You can never fill the void in your soul with more things. When you die, they've never hooked up a U-Haul to a hearse, so you could take all those things with you.
I think they did that for the pharaohs. Is they did that. It didn't work out so well, but they definitely did that.
They tried, right? They tried to fill their tomb with all their things. Yeah.
And Indiana Jones came in and just took all their stuff anyway.
They just took it. They just took it, man. But what's cool is desire starts. We can now, like, once we you can't skip a step, by the way. You can't. You have to go through them in order. A lot of times people will do what is called spiritual bypassing. They'll just say, oh, I'll just go here from this negative straight up to the top, and I'll just live in like enlightenment and be this enlightened being. And then you kind of see them and you're like, dude, you're full of it. Like you're out of one side of your mouth putting everyone down, and then on the other side of your mouth saying that you're enlightened. And it's just because they've skipped a bunch of steps. So the step after desire is anger, and anger can be so positive. Now, for me, I was using anger in a really negative way. I thought it was an empowering way, that I had this short fuse and I would get super angry and I'd tell people to change. Anger actually can be one of the most powerful, positive forces in our lives, still a negative mood. But Martin Luther King changed the world with some anger directed in a positive way. Gandhi changed the world with some anger directed in a positive way. When we see things that aren't right, and we get angry enough that we're going to put our life on the line to make a change, we can change the frickin' world with anger. Now, we don't want to live there and we don't want to act out of anger, but anger can give us the energy needed to start to make change in a really, really powerful way if we use it in the right way.
I think the key is using it in the right way. I know if I think in competitive sports, you know, in very specific situations where somebody's operating at a high degree of, you know, stressed emotion known as anger, that doesn't produce the right results. So how can we interpret that in a way that somebody would not look at that and say, well, that doesn't make sense because I'm not an angry person?
All of us get angry. And it's just, we all experience all of these emotions. Everyone has access to every single one of them, and we all experience them. We can't get away from it. But we can use anger in a positive way, particularly when we look at, okay, I'm upset about something and I need to make a change. I don't need to change them, but I need to change me. So if I'm losing a competitive sports match and I don't like the way I've been playing, I might get pretty frustrated at myself. Now, if I start to play out of anger, I could lose my composure. But out of that frustration, I could say, what specifically isn't going the way I want it to go in this game? What do I need to focus on more? How can I really lock down and play better? And then I could improve my performance at that moment without playing in anger, but use the anger to make a change. The last go ahead.
Yeah, I can see that now. Now I can see the connection where it's not using anger as the method of production. It's using anger as the tipping point to say, I need to refocus. I need to adapt to something different. I need to implement a different strategy because I'm upset with the outcome that's happening right now. So now I need to make a change. Yeah.
My friend Alan ballooned up to 300 pounds in weight. And he said, when I was 275 pounds, it was all right. I was just kind of big. And then when I was 290 pounds, you know, there was a moment when I couldn't put my shoe on because my stomach was in the way. And I would try my best to suck in as much as I could so I could get that shoe on, but that wasn't the day. He said, but then when I went to work and he was a waiter, and he had to work an upstairs table, and he was so winded that he had to take breaks and wipe the sweat off of his face. And in front of all of his peers, they looked at him and he could just see the look of disappointment or disgust on their faces. That was the moment that he got so freaking angry at himself that he said, I have to do something different. Now he is literally the healthiest, most jacked dude I've ever seen. But it was that moment of anger that said, I'm fed up. I'm done with this, and it has to be better. All right, let's move to the last of the bad moods, and that's pride. And this is also kind of a surprising one, but it's a powerful emotion, just like all of these are, and can be used in a really positive way. But when we live in pride, we're saying, I am better than you. And if I feel like I'm better than you, then that means I also am afraid some people could be better than me. And so I constantly have to be working to be the best over other people, not the best me I can be, but the best out of everyone that I'm around. And that's a really negative headspace to be in.
Yeah, I could definitely see that one. And I've personally experienced that a couple times, and that's usually where you put the blinders on. And, you know, I think it's almost like if you marry that with the 4 stages of learning, where you have the unconscious ignorance, conscious ignorance, conscious knowledge, and unconscious knowledge, when you kind of get to that higher state of like, I just know what I'm doing. And that's where you get blindsided because you have this pride about you that you're like, oh, I'm so much better. I had this happen at a tournament in jiu-jitsu where I was going to the tournament. I was already thinking about the next tournament because I was like, this is BS. Shouldn't be here. I'm going to beat everybody. And I went into a match and I wasn't even paying attention to this guy because I'm like, I'm just going to crush this dude. Yeah. And then, you know, match starts. He gets this choke going on me. I'm like, this is BS. Like, nothing's going to happen. And then I wake up and I'm like, okay, when's the match going to start? And pride totally got in the way. Yep. And there was just no way that it was like, yep. And that's probably when the anger came back.
Yeah. And then the anger can show up and it can say, I'll never do that again. And then that's where, but all these things can be positive. So let me just quickly go through the 8 positives. That took me a little longer to go through the 8 negatives, but this is why for me, this is where I veer from Hawkins. The foundation of all positive moods starts with humility, because you could have gone into that with a humble humility mind. And you could have said, well, I think I've got a lot of skill. I really don't know the outcome because I can't predict the future. So with humility, I'll respect the person across from me because I really don't know their skill set or how good they possibly could be, no matter what their record says. And then humility then could be the foundation of all good things. So after humility, we move into responsibility. I talked briefly earlier about how I was a victim to the world. And once I saw the movie The Secret, I realized that no, actually, I am absolutely responsible for everything in my life. Everything that I thought was out of my control. Maybe it's out of my control, but I'm responsible for how I deal with it. And that's the second of the positive moods. And then the third one is confidence. And I talked about this earlier too, when you were saying, oh, I've got all this strategy and the strategy is why I'm successful. And I'm like, sure, good. Being smart is really good, but you have this internal feeling of confidence it's going to work. And that confidence fuels so much success. The reason that guy wasn't a good salesperson at that convention you were at is he didn't have confidence that he was a good salesperson.
Actually, he was a good salesperson. He was very confident at telling me he was not good at sales.
Yeah, he was confident. And so confidence is really a beautiful emotion, but not in an arrogant way. This is more of a confidence that says, I know who I am, I know what I value, and I live by my values. And regardless of what happens in life, I have so much self-confidence that I can handle it. And this is a very powerful, positive way to be. Beyond confidence, we progress further into acceptance. Acceptance is really a powerful emotion. And when we're manifesting, when we're in desire, when we're in pride, a lot of times we're not willing to accept that we have limits. For you, that's kind of the story that you told. There wasn't a tremendous amount of acceptance there. Acceptance starts to become something that says, well, I could push myself through a wall. I could grind so hard to achieve all this success that I ignore my kids. I accept that there are, in fact, limits. And that if I do grind so hard to get this money and this success, maybe there's a cost I'm not willing to pay. So can I accept that I actually can't do it all? That's a hard thing for the ego to say. That's a hard thing for pride to say. Well, I believe that we've got unlimited ability to achieve anything we put our mind to. There is a cost to every single decision. In acceptance, we start to look at those costs, and rather than just blindly going for the next goal, saying, is it worth it for me?
Well, I think the idea of assigning a cost to any decision needs to also be assigned to a cost to every lack of decision. Most people assign a cost to when they make a decision, but they don't assign a cost to when they don't make a decision. Like, for example, if you look at the fellow Alan you were talking about, the cost to him not making a decision every day to change his life meant another pound going on his body and another look from a person that he respected looking at him going, what are you doing to yourself? And so there's a cost to every time when you don't make a decision, just as much as there is to when you do.
Totally. With the progression of moods. Once we go from humility to full responsibility for absolutely everything in our life, and then extreme confidence, we no longer worry about not making decisions.
Thank you. My daughter just showed up, speaking of with food here, so we're on a podcast, sweetheart.
Oh, what's up? Hi.
I'll choose whether I'm going to leave that in or not as we go forward. I love you, sweetheart.
So remember when I was talking about spiritual bypassing?
Yeah.
You can't go from the negative emotions, which is where my friend Alan was at when he was not taking care of himself. He wasn't living in responsibility. So acceptance only is accessible once we have full responsibility for everything in our life.
Yeah, and I think responsibility is one of those things that most people miss out on. And I think
because according to David Hawkins' research, 78% of the world lives below positive emotions. 78% of the world, their default state is pride and below. So only 22% of the world ever gets to an emotion as high as responsibility. And it makes sense, right? Just look at the news is always wanting to point blame. It's always look at the political, stuff we just went through. and one side's blaming the other and the other side's blaming the other. And the whole world gets up in a tizzy like, oh my God, it is their fault. Or the other side's like, it is their fault. Well, that's the blame culture. And of course it works really, really well when 78% of the world believes it. Only 22% of the world says, no, in fact, it's all of our responsibilities here. It's every single person's responsibility to take the blame and to say, let's do something about it and work together instead of blaming and fighting. But that actually doesn't win elections. Blaming does, because we're going at the majority who don't understand that responsibility is ultimately one of the things we need to do.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing about democracy, but that's a whole different discussion. When you look at the idea of now you've got through resilience, you've got through taking responsibility, you're moving up the hierarchy, you've got acceptance. What are the next steps as we move up in a very concise manner?
Absolutely. Yep. Gratitude. So once I accept everything that happens, full acceptance, like I'm not actually in control of the outcome, then we start to move into, can I just be grateful for everything that shows up? Sometimes things show up and I didn't want them, but how can I find gratitude for every single thing? Once we have gratitude for something, we can move to the next stage, which is to love it. We can't love things without first being grateful for them. And this is really, we're talking about some high spiritual concepts here, because to live in a state of love means I have to love things that I didn't like at first. And so if I don't like something, the first step is to have acceptance that it's there, and then gratitude for it in some way, and then to now love it. So you can see this in like maybe an injury. Like, and I'm sure you've been injured and you don't like that you were injured and now you're not as good, but maybe you can accept it. Like over time, I'm going to move into acceptance. And then you kind of get some space, and this injury is giving you some space from jujitsu. And now you got some time to reflect, and you can say, I'm kind of grateful for this time. I wouldn't have had it otherwise. And with that time, maybe you now have created a new business idea and your business is taken off. And because you were grateful for it, now you can say, I actually love that I got injured, because I created a whole new business out of it. And I would have never done it if that injury hadn't shown up. So that's how this progression can start to play out. Once you
I feel like you have a camera in my house, because that was my life over the past year. Is I blew my knee out. I had injury. I had to take time off of jiu-jitsu. I ended up building up my podcasting business. We now have, we manage, 50 odd podcasts or whatever. And none of that probably would have happened if I would have just been doubling down on jiu-jitsu.
Interesting.
And so it's funny that you mentioned that, because it's exactly what happened.
It's just how life is, man. But it is very synchronistic that's the example that I pulled from. So last two, when we love everything, we feel very joyful. And this is usually to give somebody an example of this. And Steve, I'll just ask you the question. Think of just one of the most joyful days of your life. What's one of the first things that shows up?
Most joyful days of my life. I mean, there's many different compartments that I find joy in. I mean, I find joy when my kids were born. I find joy when my son went to his jiu-jitsu tournament in like Pans, and he was just standing there with his army of like audience behind him and just put everything on. Like, I was just like, that moment to me was, I would probably say one of my biggest moments, because he put himself out so much to do this thing, and he performed so well, and he worked so hard to get there. I probably would say that's one of the number one, but I wouldn't have that moment if I didn't marry my wife. So that moment,
that was an important one. All these are like really beautiful.
So they sort of stack. It's hard to pinpoint one.
But there's lots of joyful days.
Yeah.
Typically, when we think of a joyful day, we say things like you just said. And here's the thing: is that the joy isn't created from the external circumstance. The joy is created from within. Everything we experience is an internal experience. The outside is happening, and then because the outside is happening, we're choosing to allow ourselves to love it. So when your son was standing in front of everyone and he had conquered everything, and you were so proud of him, that moment you were saying, I love what's happening right now. And because you loved what was happening in that moment, you felt extreme joy. So joy comes from loving our reality right now. If someone wants to experience joy every day, all they have to do is love everything in their life today. Now, this is totally possible And so people are like, well, how do I do that in the midst of this crisis? And we just went through it. You had a crisis, you blew out your knee. That's a terrible thing. And yet, if you knew the future, that was actually really good for you, that it was actually going to enhance you in some way, could you, as you blew it out, said, oh man, this is really freaking cool. So this is now how I approach my life. As I experience adversity, I say, I know that in the long run, everything is happening for my greatest benefit. So I'm going to bless the adversity and I'm going to choose to love it as best as I can today. If I can't get to love, I'm going to go to acceptance. I can accept it. Then I'm going to find ways that I'm grateful for it. Then eventually I'll move to love. And once I move to love, I'll live in joy. And the final positive mood is peace. And once you master this, that everything I've just talked about, then you now know nothing can happen that's going to ruin your joy. And when that happens, you have complete peace in the midst of a chaotic world.
I love it. You know, peace is one of those things where, I mean, you love peace, but you love chaos equally. And I love finding peace in chaos. You know, when I go to the mall and it's just chaos and everybody's fighting for parking spots and they're all just, it's weird. I get this certain zen that comes out of it. And I'm almost joyful. Like when somebody cuts me off in traffic, I don't get angry. I actually giggle. Except for when the person hit me. That wasn't as fun, but, but I still got it and I was joyful because I was helping the fire department clean up and all this other stuff because I was alive. Like I had a little scratch here. Tesla's, by the way, safest cars on the planet.
Nice. I'm so glad to hear that you're okay.
Well, if I wasn't, we're both in the other side of the spiritual world. So it means you're not either.
That would be crazy.
But, by the way, this is the Matrix. And so the idea of finding peace is it's one of those things where, yeah, like you can find peace in that chaos. And like, I find the most peace when I'm in chaotic situations. Like I love when I'm in a jiu-jitsu match and there's nothing like you're so focused. It's just, there's so much, you know, damage that could happen, but there's so much peace in that moment. And I don't know how to describe that.
No, you're doing it beautifully. Yeah, that's really freaking awesome because the only moment we ever live is this moment. Yeah. And what you're describing as you're in all this chaos is that you get really present. Yeah. And in the present, this is one of my mantras. I meditated with this monk for 40 years, or he was a monk for 40 years. I meditated with him for years. One of the mantras we would say is, I'm all right now. And in the now, this is like, it doesn't seem like that deep of a mantra, but it truly is crazy deep. We're always in the now. We're always all right. So we're always at peace in the now. And so as you're in this crazy jiu-jitsu match and anything could go wrong, you have to get so freaking present in the now. And in the now, you're always okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the better that we can relate to the idea that, you know, like you talk about the knee problem and say that is actually could spawn off so many positive things that could happen. You know, I think people can become more or less fear-based because they fear all these outcomes that they always allude to the negative outcomes rather than the positive outcomes that come from what we perceive as a negative situation. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Totally. And fear is level 5 out of 16.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be good to get like a little chart that we could put as a link on the page and send people to for that chart. Cause I like that. I really like that because I think even like, you know, we're talking about these big macro statements, but even on the idea of a micro statement, I think about, you know, when we're working with a sales rep and they have a fear of, you know, picking up the phone and talking to somebody and they've got guilt and shame around the idea that they might not be hitting their numbers. And then they can they kind of work up that hierarchy. They get to that fear moment and then being able to get across to the other side, you know, past the desire into the other side, they can actually use this as a micro management level tool set to be able to get past, you know, what would be perceived as just, you know, call fatigue or
we want to access actually any other emotion other than fear. And since we have access to all of these, you could access desire and say, well, I desire a higher income more than I want this fear, but that's not going to be super powerful in that moment because The fear could be really powerful. Usually, you know, when I train somebody to make a call, you know, I'm like, well, you're so selfish right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're all worried about yourself and what people are going to think of you. And I'm like, why don't we move into a really positive emotion? Why don't we move into love? Could you change somebody's life today with this phone call? I mean, I just ask them that question. Now I know the answer is yes. And I don't know if I've saved people from suicide from making prospecting calls or not. I'd say that there's a good chance. I know that there's some people that have been in severe depression that just because I called and I cared, that I've made their day a lot better. So if we get this person out of the fear emotion and then into some higher emotions, it's going to help them be a really good prospector. But happy to. I'll send you the chart, and it's just the progression of moods, and it's something where this is so easy because once you identify what mood am I in, you can say, well, where do I want to be, and then we just work on being there.
Yeah, and it's funny because that chart, you sort of almost Mike Tyson actually interpreted that chart a little bit, and when he talks about things that you hate and doing he says it a little bit differently, but he says, do the things that you hate like you love it. And because, you know, so if you think about where you are in the chart, you know, he's trying to get you right up to the top of the chart with the things that you ideally can't, don't resonate with. And I only say that because he's having the fight today as we record this. So
I know. Yeah, I hope he wins.
I think the world is hoping the same thing. Yeah. Yes. I think the world's hoping the same thing. Well, dude, there's so many more things that we can hit. And I'd love to do a round 2 on diving into a little bit more into some of those aspects. Because I think we've just done a very cursory understanding of it. But I think
you can go so deep into each one. Yeah, absolutely, man. But this was super fun though. To rapid fire, just teach the progression so fast is also pretty cool because you can kind of see how it all ties together.
Oh yeah, totally. I love it, and I love it as a mechanism to communicate, not only in the way of the macro, but in the way of the micro. And I think it's very applicable for both. So I think it's a really good toolkit for an individual. It's a really good toolkit for a manager. It's a really good toolkit for a parent. And so I think it's a beautiful way to look at things.
Man, thank you for having me on, bro.
Dude, it's been awesome. And guys, if you want to catch up with Matt, I highly suggest you check out his podcast. He's very active on his podcast. And if you go to the Good Mood Revolution podcast, he's got so many things on the go there. Check him out. And that you could go to the mattoneil.com/podcast, find him there, or just like a Good Mood Revolution podcast on any of your favorite players. And Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure having you, my friend. And we will catch up, I'm sure, for a second series of questions because I want to dive deeper into each of the different elements.
Awesome, man. Looking forward to it.
Sweet, man. Talk to you soon. Guys, this is The Money. This is The Mindset. This is the Mentoring Podcast. We'll see you on the next one.